Letitia James never believed in ghosts. Not the kind that knock at your door or whisper your name in the dark. No, her ghosts came dressed in suits, filed motions before breakfast, and buried their sins under layers of legal immunity. But that morning, in the mirrored stillness of a Manhattan elevator, one of those ghosts reached out and called her by name, not with sound, but with a single look. 30 seconds earlier, Letitia had stepped out of the financial crimes unit on the 15th floor, her mind laser-locked on the Marlin Group, an old money real estate syndicate repackaged as a redevelopment firm. They were gearing up to swallow another stretch of the Bronx in the name of revitalization, and she was going to stop them. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But plans have a way of falling apart when the past refuses to stay buried. She pressed the elevator button and entered alone, at least until the doors paused for a woman rushing in from the lobby, early 60s perhaps, with a thin build and eyes that had seen more than they ever said. She held a stack of folders, dressed like someone clinging to dignity on a government salary. At first, neither of them spoke. The elevator descended in silence. Floor 14, then 13. Then it happened. The woman turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse of Letitia's left wrist where her shirt sleeve had shifted. Her entire body froze. The folders dropped to the floor in a chaotic splash. Her lips parted in a gasp. No, it can't be. Letitia's brow furrowed. She turned slightly, not yet alarmed but intrigued. The woman had backed against the glass wall, visibly shaking. Her gaze was locked, unblinking, haunted on the patch of skin just above Letitia's watch. The mark. A dark, teardrop-shaped birthmark that had followed Letitia her whole life. She never thought much of it. Until now. "That mark on your left wrist," the woman whispered. "Were you born in the Bronx, June 1993? Letitia didn't answer. She didn't blink. Her hand hovered near the elevator control panel. Then she pressed the emergency stop. A soft, mechanical jolt. The elevator froze mid-descent. The hum of the city silenced. "Who are you?" she asked. The voice came low but solid. No fear, no confusion. Just wait. The woman didn't speak. She reached into her handbag with trembling fingers, pulled out a folded, worn photograph, and handed it forward without a word. Letitia took it. The photo was yellowed at the edges, the kind of picture you'd only carry if you couldn't let go. In it was a newborn wrapped in a striped hospital blanket, tiny fist clenched beside its face. And on the wrist, clearly visible, was the mark. That same teardrop birthmark, that same left arm. "That's you," the woman said, almost reverently. "They told me my baby died, but you're standing here. That's you. You're my daughter." Letitia looked at the photo, then at the woman, then, slowly, back to her own wrist. Her fingers brushed the mark, now 1,000 times heavier than it had been just minutes earlier. Her expression didn't change. She looked up and said evenly, "Leave your name and number with my assistant. I don't do street performances." She pressed the button. The elevator resumed its descent. The woman stood silent, crushed against her own shock. Letitia stepped out as the doors opened on the ground floor. She didn't glance back, but as she walked past the security desk and into the chaos of the New York morning, one hand remained at her side, clutching the wrist where the past had just grabbed her. This wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a deposition. It wasn't a case. It was something much messier. A memory that had waited 30 years to speak. And for the first time in her career, Letitia James wasn't sure if the truth would defend her or destroy everything she thought she was. That night, in a Brooklyn Heights penthouse that once held more ambition than memory, Letitia James sat alone at her kitchen table. No podium, no flashbulbs, no press secretary polishing sound bites. Just silence. And a rusted tin box that her adoptive mother had kept sealed for decades, as if its contents were more sacred than the Constitution and twice as dangerous. Her manicured fingers hesitated only once before she unlatched it. Inside, buried under faded family photos and a stack of yellowed insurance receipts, lay a brittle plastic wristband. White once, now the color of old teeth. The words still legible through the grime. Daniel's baby girl. There was no middle initial, no file number, no hospital seal. Just a name she'd never claimed, assigned to a life she wasn't supposed to live. She didn't pace. She didn't cry. She dialed. "Find me a clean lab," she said flatly to her assistant. "Discreet. I want a full maternal DNA test. Compare me with a woman named Loretta Daniels, Bronx. No trail. And pull every birth record from Cityside Hospital, June 1993. If the archives are gone, find out who made them vanish." She hung up without waiting for confirmation. In her world, silence meant obedience, and disobedience didn't last long. Cityside Hospital had been shuttered since 1996. Official reason, budgetary realignment. Unofficial reason, probably buried in a developer's golf course along with every inconvenient fact from the Giuliani years. 3 days later, a plain envelope arrived. No logos, no fingerprints, just a sealed flap and a security barcode that screamed one thing. This truth had traveled quietly because someone wanted it to be loud. Letitia shut her office door and slid her finger beneath the flap. The paper inside made no effort to soften the blow. No technical jargon, no probabilistic ambiguity. Just one cold sentence. Positive match 99 to a 98% maternal link. Letitia didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She laid the paper beside the photo Loretta had handed her in the elevator, the one with the newborn, and that unmistakable drop-shaped mark on the wrist. The evidence was now undeniable. She was Loretta's daughter, stolen, silenced, then sanitized into political ascendancy. And someone, somewhere, had made that happen. She didn't feel grateful. She felt set up, because the real question wasn't who she was. The real question was why they had kept her from knowing. Who had something to gain by faking a death certificate and feeding a mother a lie sharp enough to last 3 decades? Letitia wasn't just dealing with a family reunion. She was staring down an institutional mirage built on forged paperwork, selective amnesia, and just enough red tape to bury the dead without dirt. The kind of fraud that doesn't wear a ski mask but a badge. The kind that makes you wonder how many city officials learned to forge grief before they learned to spell justice. She leaned back in her chair and let out the softest scoff. 99.98, she muttered. What a nice, clean number. Round enough to silence doubt. Precise enough to ruin someone's pension. Then she picked up the phone again. Schedule a private meeting with Loretta Daniels. No calendar, no staff. I want it off the record. And do not mention my name in the request. If she's willing to meet, I need her to come as a mother, not a prop. As she hung up, her eyes lingered on the lab report a moment longer, not out of sentiment but calculation. Someone in the Bronx had signed her life away before it started, and whoever they were, they had done it under a city contract, probably with a gold pen. The machine that built Letitia James had filed her away as collateral damage, and like every system built to erase someone like her, it hadn't counted on her surviving, thriving, and returning with subpoena power. She looked out the window toward the courthouse dome glowing in the distance and whispered, "You gave her a casket. It'll give her answers." And just like that, the case against the Marlin Group wasn't just about land seizures or fraudulent deeds anymore. It was personal. It was generational. And it had just crossed into the territory where policy dies and vengeance begins. The room where it happened was sterile white walls, no flags, no seal behind the leather chairs. Not the courtroom, not the press room. This wasn't for politics. This was the room reserved for the kind of meetings that rewrote birth certificates and buried entire bloodlines. Letitia James stood by the window when Loretta Daniels was escorted in, clutching a handbag that looked older than the scandal they were about to exhume. No entourage, no security, not even a notepad. Letitia had cleared the room and the schedule, because sometimes when the truth stinks this bad, you don't air it, you bottle it, label it, and prepare to weaponize it later. Loretta was offered a seat, but refused it. A reflex, perhaps, from 3 decades of being spoken down to by bureaucrats with clipboards and predatory grins. Letitia waited, not out of courtesy, but calculation. She'd learned long ago that silence makes liars sweat, but it also makes truth-tellers speak without filter. Loretta's voice cracked, but her words didn't stutter. She remembered everything. In June 1993, I gave birth at Cityside Hospital, Bronx. I went into labor at dawn, complications started by noon, and they had to put me under. When I woke up, they told me my baby died. She didn't look away. Congenital heart defect. That's what the doctor said. He even gave me a name. Dr. Feldman, I think. He told me it was fast, merciful, but I never saw her, never held her. No paperwork, no autopsy. Just a piece of paper with a blurry stamp and no patient ID. Letitia didn't blink. She didn't reach for tissue. She reached for a pen. "Who signed the paper?" she asked calmly. "Who gave you that information? Who was running the hospital at the time?" Loretta didn't hesitate. 3 syllables. Helen March, administrator, and just like that, the entire room shifted. The name dropped like a gavel onto an invisible docket. Letitia wrote it down, not just as a name, but as an opening salvo. Loretta continued, her voice steadier now. 48 hours later, city officials came, claimed it was an urban renewal project, said we had to vacate the complex. My husband Nathan refused. Said he'd fight it, said he'd sue. 3 days later, he fell from a scaffold. They said it was an accident. There were no witnesses, and no one investigated. The way she said accident could have blistered paint. Letitia didn't flinch. She'd heard this script before, just never with her name scribbled in the margins. Loretta searched her face, maybe hoping for some tenderness. Instead, Letitia asked a final question. "And after that?" Loretta breathed deep. 6 months. I went to every office in that damn city, vital records, Department of Health, even City Hall. Every time I asked for my daughter's file, I got the same answer. No data found. They broke me. They erased you. But I never stopped carrying your photo. And I never forgot that mark. Her voice was trembling now, but not from fear, from fury, and maybe, for the first time in 30 years, from validation. She had stared into the eyes of a stranger and pulled her daughter back from the dead with nothing but memory and a scar. Letitia didn't offer comfort. She offered precision. "You said Helen March?" Loretta nodded. Letitia closed her notebook and stood. Her voice was low, sharp, and clean enough to be surgical. "This conversation never happened. Do not speak to anyone, not press, not lawyers, not even family. If they ask, you were visiting a friend in Midtown. Loretta blinked. Why? Letitia glanced at the window, where the city skyline looked like a crime scene waiting for a warrant. Because whoever orchestrated this didn't just fake a death. They used it to clear entire neighborhoods off the map. And if Helen March signed that document, she didn't do it alone. This wasn't grief. This was policy. She walked Loretta to the door without touching her. "He'll be in touch," she said. "But next time, don't bring the photo. Bring names." Loretta stepped out, and the door shut with a finality that only someone raised in courts and cover-ups could appreciate. Alone again, Letitia stood motionless, replaying every sentence in her head like courtroom testimony. She didn't trust coincidences, and this wasn't one. A baby declared dead to push a development deal. A father eliminated for resisting eminent domain dressed up as urban renewal. And a woman erased from 2 lives, now running the state's highest legal office, holding the pen that could finally rewrite the lie. No, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a blueprint. One that had worked so well it probably got used again and again. The real question now wasn't just who signed the order. It was how many other babies funded the skyline, and how many dead men built it. The moment the door clicked shut behind Loretta Daniels, Letitia didn't head back to her desk. She walked straight into the war room, her private, unlisted suite 3 floors beneath the official attorney general's office. No assistants, no recording devices. Just a metal table, 1 dim lamp, and 4 aides who knew that stepping into this room meant leaving their resumes and immunity at the door. She dropped the name like a match on dry parchment. Helen March. Then she added a second name, one the city hadn't heard in decades, though his fingerprints were all over its skeleton. William Hartwell. And finally, she laid down the real charge. We're not talking about a hospital error. We're talking about relocation orders signed in the name of a grieving widow on the exact day her husband accidentally fell off scaffolding. This wasn't coincidence. This was choreography. She ordered a full excavation of every document related to the 1993 East Bronx redevelopment project. Not summaries, originals. I want every zoning map, budget record, and property transfer. And I want the name of every city official who touched the file before, during, and after. Hours later, the documents poured in, scanned, archived, digitized, and right in the middle, glowing like a toxic fingerprint, was a withdrawal of claim for wrongful death compensation, dated 1 day after Nathan Daniels' mysterious fall. Signed, allegedly, by L. Daniels. Except, as Letitia's team confirmed using social benefits filings from that same year, the signature wasn't Loretta's. Different loops, different slant, different pressure. It was forged. Sloppy, too, as if the forger assumed no one would ever check. After all, who audits a widow's grief? And then came the kicker. The land wasn't sold to a long-standing firm or public housing developer. It was acquired by an outfit named Marlin Group Holdings, created just weeks before the deal, with no prior business filings, no operational history, and no physical address that wasn't a P.O. box shared by 6 other shell companies. Letitia didn't need to say it aloud, but she did anyway, just to hear it burn. They used death certificates, like deeds. They built equity on human erasure. The legal representative who authorized the transaction, none other than William Hartwell, then serving as head of the New York City Legal Department. His signature appeared on every approval stamp next to the city seal, under the polite fiction that Loretta had signed away her rights willingly. Hartwell, it turned out, had not disappeared into quiet retirement. He was now a board member of a gleaming non-profit championing civil justice and equitable urban growth, a familiar racket where corruption wore compassion like a tailored suit. Letitia didn't announce an investigation. She didn't leak to the press. She gave a single order: trace everything, his donations, his clients, his flight logs. If this man signed relocation papers over a dead man's name, we're not just looking at a fraudulent sale. We're looking at a murder-adjacent conspiracy. This wasn't just about one family, one fake document, or one crooked redevelopment deal. This was about a system so confident in its ability to bury bodies and rewrite consent that it didn't even bother to disguise its theft. They counted on people like Loretta forgetting. They didn't expect her to remember, and they certainly didn't expect her daughter to grow up and become the Attorney General. But here she was with the badge, the pen, and the motive. Letitia stared at Hartwell's glossy headshot from the nonprofit website. "Smile while you can," she murmured, "because if you erased the Daniels family to fast-track a shopping plaza, I'm going to erase your legacy from the foundation up." And the question she didn't dare say aloud, at least not yet, was the one she already knew the answer to. How many other signatures on those 1993 projects were written by ghosts? Letitia didn't knock. She simply stood in the living room of her parents' Albany home, arms folded, silence louder than any greeting. The familiar smell of lemon polish and old books did nothing to soothe her. Her mother's hand trembled as she reached for the couch, eyes scanning Letitia's face like a stranger's. "Where did I come from?" Letitia asked, not softly, not cruelly, but with the exact clarity of someone who already knew the answer and was giving the other person one last chance to be honest. Mr. James looked down at his hands. "Summer of '93, he said. "You were wrapped in a hospital blanket. No note, no ID. We found you by the riverside. We thought, God help us. We thought maybe you'd been left there by someone who wanted you to live. They didn't go to the police. They didn't call child services, because they had tried before several times to adopt, and the answer had always been no. Too old, too poor, not stable enough. The system had labeled them unfit, and the system doesn't take kindly to second opinions. So when a woman named Olga Marsh showed up and offered to facilitate things through a backdoor network for undocumented infants, it felt less like a crime and more like a blessing. By 1996, a minor county court had signed off on Letitia's new identity. No federal file, no origin story, just a birth date, a last name, and a world that had already rewritten itself. But the paper trail didn't disappear. It had simply been rerouted through quiet judges, forgotten clinics, and women like Olga Marsh. Only there was no Olga Marsh. There was Helen March, the same hospital administrator who declared Letitia dead to Loretta, the same woman whose signature appeared on fake death certificates and relocation orders. Letitia stared at the personnel records, the alias history, the transfer logs. "She gave me away like property," Letitia whispered, "and then told my mother I didn't make it. That wasn't adoption. That was laundering. And for the first time, the enormity of it came into view. This wasn't an isolated tragedy, a rogue doctor, or a bureaucratic mistake. It was an industry. A systematic operation that took undocumented infants, erased their history, and reinserted them into society under names that wouldn't raise questions. Children born inconveniently near government land grabs, inconveniently to parents who refused to move, inconveniently attached to property values. She picked up the phone. Her voice was low but not soft. "Get me every file on Greene County adoptions between 1992 and 1995. If they came through Marsh or March, I want names. I want placements. I want to know if those children were found near project zones or public redevelopment areas. There was a pause. Then she added, and start cross-checking against real estate transactions in those same years. If this is what I think it is, then we weren't just stolen. We were part of the price tag. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice in communities stripped of records, stripped of homes, stripped of voice. And all along she had been their case study. What she couldn't say not yet was whether anyone else from her generation bore the same untraceable scar. A fake death certificate, a sealed file, a new name. But what she could say, what she would say when the time came was that justice had a memory, even if the state didn't. And the woman named March, who trafficked in shadows and silence, had just earned herself a subpoena. She didn't knock on Marcia Beecham's door like a politician. She came like a warrant with legs, dressed in gray, no entourage, no press, no badge. Just the truth, wrapped in 32 years of silence, and the kind of resolve that has no interest in comfort. Marcia lived in a modest split level in Yonkers, the kind with faded shutters and a front porch swing that hadn't moved in years. Her voice trembled at first, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. I haven't worked in medicine in decades, she said. I signed NDAs. I have grandchildren now. Letitia didn't argue. She simply raised her left wrist, revealing the dark teardrop-shaped mark just beneath the bone. Marcia's mouth parted, and time folded in on itself. I thought I'd never see her again, she whispered. That was all it took. The dam broke. Marcia's story didn't come out all at once. It dripped like blood from a scalpel. She remembered the baby. No complications, no anomalies, vitals clean. That girl was breathing strong, she said. Cried like she owned the room. But a day later, someone from hospital administration accompanied by a man in a black suit came down to the nursery and ordered the infant removed for emergency external testing. No paperwork, no explanation. Just a mandate. When Marcia returned to her shift, the baby's file had been scrubbed, not redacted, deleted. You don't delete charts in a hospital, she said. You update them, archive them. But this one vanished. 2 days later, a hospital-wide memo announced the infant had died of a congenital heart defect. No autopsy, no clinical signs, just the memo and a request for discretion. They didn't want questions. They wanted quiet. Letitia leaned forward. Do you remember the man in the suit? Marcia looked down, then up again. I didn't know his name back then, she said. But I saw him years later, on the news, when he joined the city's legal counsel. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. William Hartwell, the same man who had signed off on the forged relocation order, the same man who, decades later, would sit on the board of a so-called civil justice fund, a man whose entire career was built on repackaging other people's ruin into ribboned policy proposals. Letitia didn't speak. She didn't blink. She just squeezed the folder in her hands until the paper bent like cartilage. Back in her car, the silence was radioactive. Hartwell wasn't just a name anymore. He was a thread, and someone had tugged it 30 years ago until a child's identity unraveled completely. The records from Cityside Hospital. Gone. Accidentally destroyed during a facility relocation in 2007, which conveniently coincided with the hospital's acquisition by a private equity firm tied to a subsidiary of Marlin Group. No digital copies, no chain of custody, just a black hole where a life was supposed to be cataloged. This wasn't negligence. It was design. And the man in the suit, the hospital administrator, the dead father, the fake adoption papers, they weren't coincidences. They were bricks in a wall built to bury the truth under decades of zoning permits and foundation grants. Letitia stared out the window at the skyline, her city, supposedly. But now it felt like a crime scene with a press office. "They didn't lose me," she said flatly. "They erased me. And then they built a city over my body." She didn't say it for effect. She said it like she was reading it off a ledger, because that's what it was, a transaction. One life removed, several careers advanced, and a real estate empire secured. She opened her notebook and wrote 3 names: William Hartwell, Helen March, Marlin Group. Then she drew a 4th line under them, blank, waiting. Because somewhere, someone else had signed off on the final phase, the erasure. And whoever they were, they had made one fatal error. They had let the erased grow up, and now she was writing her own record, one name at a time. She didn't flinch when the security footage arrived. She watched it twice, once to confirm the attacker's stance, and a second time to study his retreat. No mask, just a worn hoodie and a veteran's limp, but the punch was precise. Not meant to kill, meant to intimidate. Loretta had left the clinic with a prescription and a reusable grocery bag. 10 seconds later, she was on the ground, clutching her shoulder, screaming her daughter's name. The footage cut off just before the man slipped down a side street, but the trace left behind was bureaucratic, not forensic. The man was a former field coordinator for a humanitarian sounding front called the Bright Start Relief Initiative, a group whose stated mission was to offer logistical support for low-income housing transitions. Translation: they helped bulldoze families off the map, all while handing out tax-deductible granola bars. And who funded this outfit of masked evictions and moral grease? None other than the Civil Justice Fund. Chairman Emeritus, William Hartwell. Letitia moved fast. Loretta was relocated to a secure location outside Manhattan. No names on the intake, no digital records, just a safe house wrapped in analog silence. Then came the real work, a full breakdown of Bright Start's field operations from 1992 to 2003. The same year City Hall was transforming Harlem and the Bronx into something more profitable, more photogenic, more white. One name stood out across the records like a recurring rash: Olga Marsh, same woman who trafficked Letitia to her adoptive parents under a false name. Only now she was rebranded as Director of Community Coordination for Marlin Group. Apparently, baby laundering was just Phase 1. Phase 2 was selling the condos. The trap was set at a benefit gala hosted at the Plaza White Orchids, warm lighting, a guest list dripping with donor teeth. Olga arrived in a navy suit, her hair in a bun that said "serious," but her earrings screamed old money and old sins. She didn't recognize Letitia at first. But the moment the Attorney General stepped into her space, no podium, no entourage. Olga's smile dropped like a market index after an SEC raid. "You made my mother think I was dead," Letitia said, her voice as flat as a judge's gavel. Olga blinked, then offered the kind of condescending chuckle that rich women reserve for parking tickets and public school kids. "We gave you a better life," she replied. What followed wasn't an apology, it was a pitch deck. Olga admitted she'd placed Letitia into a stable environment to eliminate potential legal complications stemming from Loretta and Nathan, whom she described as volatile. In other words, poor, black, and inconvenient. They were dangerous to themselves, she said. You were spared that. Letitia didn't blink. Was Hartwell there when they took me? The question hung like a wire between them. Olga didn't answer. She simply shrugged. the way bureaucrats do when a child's life is just a misfiled form. You wouldn't be where you are today if we hadn't intervened. And there it was, the ideology of the empire dressed up as philanthropy. They didn't steal a baby. They curated her, molded her into a success story, gave her the privilege of becoming a symbol in the very system built on erasing people like her. The gala lights shimmered like stage props. Applause rose for some irrelevant award. But Letitia's eyes stayed fixed on Olga, the woman who once erased her name like it was a clerical error. She left the plaza without dessert. Hours later, a letter arrived at her private office. No email, no courier signature, just a thick envelope bearing the seal of Marlin Group Holdings. Inside, a dinner invitation from William Hartwell. Location, the 60th floor conference suite of Marlin Group HQ. The message was handwritten, its tone cordial but impossible to misread. Letitia, let's talk. No lawyers, no press, just us. A signature followed. No title, no flourish, just WH. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a summons. And she was ready to show up, not as the girl they tried to erase, but as the woman who had returned under her own name, with receipts. Because if they wanted a private conversation, she'd bring the full weight of public memory with her. She walked in without a coat, without an aide, and without a trace of hesitation. 60 floors above Manhattan, the room was engineered for intimidation glass walls, cold lighting, and a view of the city so panoramic it felt more like a threat than a luxury. Letitia didn't flinch. She was raised in shadows like these, taught early that power doesn't whisper, it smirks. At the head of the table sat William Hartwell, legs crossed, hands folded over a manila folder like he was presiding over a eulogy he'd written himself. Beside him, Olga Marsh, dressed like a lobbyist but reeking of old institutional decay, and completing the tableau, the mayor of New York, slick, photogenic, polling well and deeply indebted to Marlin Group Holdings. The very image of bipartisan rot in a tailored suit. No wine, no food, no pleasantries, just paperwork, waiting to be weaponized. Hartwell didn't wait. "You've pieced together a compelling narrative," he said, voice calm like a surgeon before the incision. "But narratives don't hold up in court unless you want to burn the whole city down with it." Letitia didn't sit. "I don't need the whole city," she said. "Just you." There was a pause, respectful, maybe even impressed, but brief. Hartwell leaned back, gesturing toward the stack of folders like they were gifts. "Then let's not be enemies," he said. "Let's be practical." What followed was less negotiation than extortion dressed up in non-profit language. The Civil Justice Fund, Hartwell's private money laundromat for public virtue, would bankroll the community legal clinics Letitia had pitched for years but never received city approval. Scholarships, maternal health programs, grant capital for restorative justice centers, all the things she wanted, now suddenly affordable. "We support your vision," Olga added, her tone dripping with counterfeit concern. "We want to empower the same people you do. And we can help your mother. Proper care, discreet. No more accidents." The implication hung there like the air in a closed casket. Letitia raised an eyebrow. "And the price?" Olga didn't blink. "You stop digging. You shelve your findings. No press conference, no subpoenas. You go back to being the righteous public servant with the spotless record. In return, everyone wins." Hartwell folded his hands again. "Or," he said, almost bored, "you can walk out of here and find yourself under investigation for falsifying adoption records. We unseal your file. Call your story political theater. Cast doubt on everything you've built. You'll spend the next year defending your past instead of shaping the future. She moved slowly to the glass wall, letting her eyes travel across the city skyline. Lights blinked in buildings that had swallowed generations. Streets below hummed with lives that didn't know they were collateral in someone else's zoning agenda. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I was born here," she said, "buried here, and now I'll exhume this whole damn city if I have to." She turned back, the silence now theirs to hold. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, already calculating his press strategy. Hartwell's jaw tightened. Olga's smile cracked, just slightly. Letitia stepped to the door, hand already on the steel handle. "Next time we meet," she said without turning, "bring a lawyer or a priest." Then she left, leaving behind the scent of scorched pretense and a conference room full of men who had mistaken a stolen child for a closed chapter. What they didn't understand was that she hadn't come to negotiate. She'd come to warn them quietly, once. And they'd just wasted it. She didn't whisper it. She didn't ease into it. Letitia James stood in front of a wall of press, courtroom flags behind her, a dozen mics pointed like bayonets and detonated truth with the precision of a prosecutor and the fury of a daughter returned from the grave. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady, cold. "This is about every child erased for profit, every mother lied to, and every institution that signed the dotted line. It wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning." The Attorney General had just cracked open a time-locked vault of crimes dressed as policy, and she was dragging names out into the daylight. The banner behind her didn't say campaign, it said criminal investigation. And for once, it meant it. The announcement landed like an earthquake through every real estate trust, public hospital, and nonprofit tied to urban development from the 1990s. A task force was formed outside the usual channels, outside City Hall influence, and outside Marlin's checkbook. Investigators began combing through forced redevelopment orders, specifically between 1990 and 2000, focused on neighborhoods that had quietly disappeared from city maps while their families were silenced with lowball payouts, forged documents, or, in the case of Loretta Daniels, plain old death certificates for babies that never even died. The first wave of findings turned up something chilling. 17 cases. 17 infants allegedly deceased according to city records, yet none of the deaths had valid certificates. Most of the files had one thing in common: the same hospital, the same redevelopment zones, and names like Marlin Group Holdings buried somewhere in the back pages. Then came the breakthrough. An old nurse's aide, Cheryl Keyes, came forward after seeing the press conference. She didn't speak in lawyered-up evasions. She spoke plainly, like a woman who had cleaned up too many messes not to recognize a cover-up when it stinks. Years ago, she had overheard Olga Marsh in a hospital corridor referring to newborns taken during evictions as project kids, not as patients, not as human beings, but as inventory, assigned value based on zip code, race, and projected socioeconomic placement. It was like a system, she told investigators. Some kids were listed as non-viable assets, others flagged for adoption markets in higher income districts. The language wasn't just cruel, it was corporate. But the real bombshell didn't come from a witness. It came from a file directory buried in the server of a Marlin financial branch hidden behind fake payroll files and misnamed folders. There it was, X93, a code no one was meant to find. Inside, spreadsheets matching hospital clearance zones to real estate redevelopment maps. Alongside, tables labeled adoption demand by zip code, complete with estimated tax brackets, racial preferences, and keyword tags like no paperwork risk. If eugenics and gentrification ever had a baby, it was named X93. This wasn't oversight. This was orchestration. Letitia didn't wait for spin control. She moved Loretta, her mother, her origin, her living evidence into witness protection, not because the press might hound her, but because someone already had. Because a woman who lost her husband to a mysterious scaffolding fall and her baby to bureaucratic ether had survived long enough to testify, and that made her dangerous. And in the world Letitia had now declared war on, danger to the powerful was the same as guilt. What Marlin built over the bodies of the voiceless was now under a floodlight, and Letitia had just confirmed she was far from finished. It didn't end with handcuffs or headlines. It ended with a name. Not a settlement, not a plea deal, not some conveniently timed leave of absence dressed up as atonement. At a special judiciary hearing in Albany, Letitia James stood before the state's most powerful legal body, not as a politician angling for her next title, but as a survivor holding the receipts. One by one, she laid them out. Sworn testimony from Marcia Beecham, the X93 digital archives detailing adoption trafficking by zip code, forged documents signed by William Hartwell during his time as city legal chief. The evidence didn't whisper, it screamed. The committee didn't clap. They ordered Hartwell to resign, effective immediately. Olga Marsh was handed a federal subpoena before she could even leave the chamber. And the crown jewel of New York's shadow redevelopment empire, Marlin Group, was frozen in place, stripped of authority pending criminal investigation. Letitia didn't smile. She didn't deliver a victory speech or pose for the cameras outside. Instead, she walked back to her office alone, pushing open the door to find exactly what she had left there days ago. A photo from Loretta, the only one they had before everything shattered, and a small glass frame containing the hospital bracelet that should have never gone missing. Daniel's baby girl, the tag still read, brittle with time but unbent. For decades, her name had been lost to files, sold off through forged signatures, and buried under buildings named after donors and bankers. But now it had a room. That afternoon, with no press allowed, a new plaque was unveiled inside the office of the Attorney General, Daniel's conference room in honor of the name never recorded. Loretta stood beside Letitia, hand resting on the brass. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The room did it for her. The press had already caught wind that Letitia James had declined to run for governor. No exploratory committee, no campaign team, no flashy donors waiting in the wings. Her statement was simple. I have unfinished business. Reporters tried spinning it as a strategic retreat, but those who knew what the last year had unearthed understood this wasn't a retreat. It was a siege. Back inside the office, as sunset began bleeding across the skyline, Letitia stood at the window watching the city that once tried to erase her. A young aide approached, wide-eyed, holding a folder marked with a new inquiry. "Is this the end?" he asked, half hoping, half afraid. Letitia didn't look away from the window. Her voice came low, measured. You want to know what justice is? It's not about closing a case. It's about opening the one nobody else dares to. And just like that, the light in the room shifted not toward resolution, but toward revelation. Because in her world, justice wasn't a verdict. It was the next question.